One of the main exercises that should be included in a training regime is the deadlift. The deadlift is one of the main lifts required by many bodybuilders because a deadlift is a compound movement that utilizes multiple joints and muscles. Additionally, the deadlift is a functional movement pattern that increases strength and function in the general population. For example, deadlifting a heavy object off the floor can help prevent and treat lower back pain, thus aiding in the performance of daily activities. As pointed out by Ripto, the deadlift is a simple movement. However, the deadlift can be broken down into two phases, the concentric and eccentric portion. During the concentric phase of a deadlift, the ankle, knee, hip, and sacral joints go into extension with minimal movement occurring between the sacrum and the trunk. Reducing movement between the sacrum and the trunk stabilizes the lumbar spine, preventing injury to the lower back. In addition, keeping the spine neutral enhances the activation of the gluteus maximus muscles. As a result, when the deadlift is performed properly, the hip extensor muscles should be primarily responsible for vertical bar displacement. One of the reasons why the deadlift is difficult to execute properly is because of the various steps required. For example, the deadlift is not one continuous movement. Instead, the deadlift has three important steps: the lift-off, the knee pass, and the lockout. During the lift-off phase, the knee extensors are primarily responsible for getting the barbell off the floor. Once the barbell passes the knees, the hip and knee extensors equally contribute to the movement. During the lockout phase, the knees should be fully extended. Therefore, the remainder of the movement should be accomplished from the hip extensors. The deadlift can be divided into two main categories, the traditional deadlift and the sumo deadlift. The traditional deadlift is performed with a shoulder-width stance and a hand grip outside the legs. On the other hand, the sumo deadlift requires a wider than shoulder-width stance, resulting in the feet outside of the hand grip. Ripto pointed out that due to a shorter leg effect, the sumo deadlift results in a more vertical back angle. This results in a shorter moment arm, reducing the load on the trunk musculature. As a result, the sumo deadlift is less effective than the traditional deadlift for strengthening the core, lower back, and posterior chain muscles. Because more mechanical and physiological work is needed for the traditional deadlift is more popular among strength and conditioning coaches. However, because the sumo deadlift uses a wider stance width than the traditional deadlift, more work is required from the adductor and gracilis muscles. Therefore, Ripto discussed the proper biomechanics of a traditional deadlift and pointed out that the initial setup of a deadlift can have a large effect on the performance of the movement. For example, Ripto states that the bar should begin 1 inch away from the shins to allow for an efficient bar path during the pull. This setup will place the bar in the middle of the foot. This is an important concept to consider throughout the remainder of the steps because moving the bar away from the middle of the foot reduces the efficiency of the pull. Once the individual is at an optimal distance from the bar, further steps are required for a successful deadlift performance. For example, without moving the bar, hand grip should be achieved by hinging at the hips and be placed just outside of the legs. The knees should bend until the shins touch the bar, however, any more lowering of the hips should be prevented. Before beginning the pull, the upper back muscles should be engaged. Upper back engagement lifts the chest upward and stabilizes the lumbar spine. In addition, eye gaze should be maintained 12 to 15 feet in front of the lifter to maintain neutral positioning of the cervical spine. The lifter is now ready to perform the pull. After taking a deep breath, the bar should be dragged up the legs to maintain a vertical bar path. This will prevent forward traveling of the bar. Once at the top of the pull, hips and knees should be fully extended with the chest up. In addition, eye gaze should be placed in a downward direction. Once a pull is complete, the lifter should betray a normal lordotic and kyphotic curve. The eccentric portion of the deadlift will be the exact opposite of the concentric portion. When incorporating the traditional deadlift into an exercise program, two different lifting styles can be used to vary training. For example, pausing and bouncing the barbell off the floor varies time under tension, altering muscular recruitment. Pausing occurs when the barbell comes to a complete stop on the floor before rising for the next repetition. Alternatively, bouncing allows the barbell to bounce off the floor between each repetition. Bouncing the barbell off the floor can be effective for athletes aiming for a higher number of sets and repetitions because it requires minimal eccentric control. Krajewski et al. Were interested in comparing the biomechanics of pausing and bouncing and determining the possible advantages and disadvantages of each style. Therefore, the researchers conducted a study on 20 physically active males and compared the performance of a 1 rep max deadlift using a pause and bouncing technique. The order of lifts was randomized, and the participants were given 2 to 5 minutes of rest between trials. All participants reported their rate of perceived exertion on a Borg 10-point scale. Krajewski et al. Found that the pausing and bouncing technique affected the ankle, knee, and hip joints differently. For example, a lower net joint moment impulse occurred from the bouncing technique, reducing joint work and force production. Because reduced joint work decreases muscle activation, the researchers found that muscle tension is not fully engaged during the peak bounce height, possibly increasing injury risk. In addition, the participants reported a higher RPE score on the pause technique than the bounce. As pointed out by Ripto, the deadlift is a simple yet complex movement. Therefore, understanding the biomechanics of a proper deadlift is key to successful performance and for preventing injury. There are multiple steps to the deadlift. However, practicing the steps of the lift off the knee pass and the lockout stages can enhance deadlift performance. The traditional and sumo deadlift are common deadlifting styles. However, the traditional deadlift is suggested over the sumo deadlift. In addition, pausing the barbell on the platform is recommended over bouncing as it engages more muscle groups and promotes better technique.